Shabbat Shalom. Did everybody get your coffee and your dessert? There's not much dessert left. My kids were here. It's really a wonderful, wonderful turnout tonight. Thank you all for coming out on a cold Friday evening to learn a little bit of Torah. So what we had in the service is called a Vorschbeit, just a little bit of an appetizer, a little taste of what is to come. It's my pleasure, and Rabbi Feinstein, we're getting your texts. They're coming, as is the Mashiach. What? No, we have text for today too. We have text for everything. I want to acknowledge, by way of stalling, that there are 7 past presidents of our congregation in this room tonight, and 8 if you count Sharon Cates, who's past president of Beth Israel, which I think should count for double. Really, I don't think they've all been together in one place in a long time. So it's wonderful to have you here. You can visit your pictures. Without any further ado, and the texts are coming, Rabbi Ed Feinstein.
What's this?
That's a camera. It's recording.
Really? Can I move up to there? Can I move over here? Sure. You can move the camera. I can move it. I don't need the podium. I just need the mic. Thank you. Hi. It's a Jewish event, so please eat. The more you eat, the more you'll learn, and that way at least you'll go home and say, well, the speaker was okay, but the dessert. I said to the rabbi, it's really wonderful that so many people came out to study together. He said, no, it's the chicken. So on behalf of the chicken, I want to thank you for coming. I think that's wonderful. Again, thank you to the rabbis, Cantor, the leadership of the community, and the Torah study group for having me come. It's a lovely opportunity to visit Vancouver. I haven't been here in a very long time. I taught a Wexner class here about 20 years ago. So it's beautiful. And I love what you've done with the city since I left. It's about 4 times the size. It's huge now. It's all these apartment buildings. So when like most most Jewish kids my age, I was raised in suburbia, and I went to Hebrew school. Afternoon, I went to public school in their daytime. Went to afternoon Hebrew school. I was taken to Hebrew school. That's how. But I was that very strange child that enjoyed Hebrew school. And I enjoyed Hebrew school for a really simple reason. I have 3 brothers. So this was the best chance to meet girls. So what would happen is they would seat us, they wanted me to be quiet, so they would seat me with girls. And I would chat up everybody. I would begin a conversation with anybody female. And I had a wonderful time. I met all these beautiful young women. And the teachers, all of our teachers were former Israeli commandos. And she would look down at me and she would scowl and she'd say, Yitzchak, Sheket. Yitzchak's my Hebrew name. And Sheket means shut up, quiet, be quiet. And I'd say, Kain Mara, Kain, Beseder. It's fine, it's okay. And then I'd chat up the girl on the other side. And she'd look down at me and say, Yitzchak, Sheket. Be quiet. And I'd say, Kain, Mara, Kain, of course. But I had bigger ambitions, and I'd chat up the girl next to me. And she'd finally get fed up, and she'd look at me and say, Yitzchak, La Sifriya, go to the library. Which was fine with me, because the synagogue had a very good library. And I'd take my stuff, and I'd go to the library, and I'd sit there, and I read through the whole library. That's where I learned how to love Jewish books. And at 6 o'clock, the old guys from the Minyan would come in. You know, the old guys, they're thousands of years old. And they'd come in and they taught me to smoke cigars, tell dirty jokes, and drink scotch. And I was 8 years old at the time, so this was a wonderful thing. And, 6:30, my mom and dad would pick me up and they'd say, how was it? It was wonderful. So this was my Hebrew education. Until the night when I got my first Yitzchak Sheket, and my second Yitzchak Sheket, and the teacher said La Sifriya, and I got ready to go like usual. And then as I reached the door, she pronounced the one word that strikes terror in the heart of young Hebrew school students. She said, Rega, which means, hang on a minute. Kain Mora? Yes, teacher? You know, she said, you're in the library. You should do something for me. Sure, what would you like me to do? Write a book report. Okay, no problem. I'm good at book reports. Can I choose any book, or is there one in particular? And then she got this very conspiratorial smile on her face. She said, yeah, the Bible. Write a book report about the Bible. I said, you can't write a book report about the Bible. She says, it's a book, right? Yeah, then write a book report. Have it done by 6:30 or you never go home. So I went to the library. I cheated, I have to tell you. I took down the Torah, just the first 5 books. And I took, remember 3rd grade paper? That big line paper and number 3 pencil. And I put my name at the top, Yitzchak Sheket, right? And then down the margin, you write all the categories of a book report. You know, name of book. The Torah. Easy. Author. Uh-oh. Just write unknown. Publisher, Jewish Publication Society of Philadelphia. Setting of the book. Somewhere in the Middle East. Main character of the book. Plot of the book. Climax of the book. Resolution of the climax. And the all-important, would you recommend this book to your friends? Now, it occurs to me that I've been writing that book report for most of my adult life. Really, what is the narrative arc of the Bible? What is the story of our scripture? And for that matter, what's the narrative arc of all of Jewish life? What's the story of Jewish life? We don't read the Bible that way. We read the Bible by this week's Torah portion, or this particular episode, or this particular chapter, sometimes even more microscopically, this particular verse or this particular word. But very rarely do we ask ourselves, what's the whole thing about? What's the whole thing about? And I think it's important to ask that question. What is the narrative arc of Jewish life? What's the whole thing about? What's the message of our tradition? What does it say to us? Now, there are reasons why we don't ask that question. We don't ask that question because the Jewish tradition has always been much more comfortable with how questions than why questions. The kid at the Seder who asks the question, what are all the rules and traditions of Passover? He's privileged as the Chacham, the wise kid. The kid who asks the question, Mazel Lachem, what's this mean to you? Which really is the most important question of Passover. How does the narrative of Passover, how does the narrative of slavery and freedom touch your life? Where does it fit in your personal narrative? That's the most important question of the Seder, but that kid is castigated as Rasha, my brother Larry, the evil child. Now, why is he the evil child? That seems to me to be the most important question of the whole Seder. And then there's that other kid, which I never could get. She'eno yodea lishol. The kid who doesn't know how to ask a question. What kind of Jew doesn't know how to ask a question? At least you say, when do we eat? You know, I mean, that's a question. But I know who he is. I know who he is. He's yesterday's Rasha. He's the kid who came to us yesterday and said, what does this mean? What is the narrative arc and how does it fit my personal narrative? And we told him, shut up. Do the Seder. So you know what? He shut up. He sits quietly at the end of the table with an attitude of contempt to the whole thing. And by the way, the Jewish world is filled with kids like him. Some years ago, the Pew Research Institute did a study of American Jewish identity. And they discovered 5.5 million Jews in North America. And they asked those people, what is your current religion? And 20% of them, and 33% of young Jews, checked the box labeled none. None. Not Orthodox, not conservative, not Reform, not Chabad, not Renewal, not Reconstructionist, not Zionist, not non-Zionist. None Jews. Jews of no particular faith. Because when they ask that question of us, what does this mean? We told them to sit down and shut up. And again, I understand why we did. You see, our generation is a unique generation. In all of Jewish history, the greatest act of destruction was the destruction of the Holy Temple in the year 70. We're going to talk about that tomorrow morning. But the Holocaust matches it or exceeds it. And in all of Jewish history, the greatest moment of redemption is Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt. But the recreation of the state of Israel matches it or exceeds it. Problem is, the Yetziat Mitzrayim and Churban Abayit, the Exodus from Egypt, the destruction of the Holy Temple, took place 1,500 years apart. The Holocaust and the recreation of Israel took place in the experience of one generation. How the hell do you make sense of that? How do you make sense of that kind of vacillation, of that kind of oscillation? What kind of faith can you have when you've seen first the most destructive moment, then the most redemptive moment in one generation's experience? So you know what happened? At the end of the war, we simply suspended all questions of faith. I was raised by a wonderful rabbi, learned, wise, deep, sensitive, but he never talked about God. And when I got to rabbinical school and I was a hellraiser as a rep student, I went to my rabbi and I said, "Why the heck didn't you talk to me about God?" And he looked at me with tears in his eyes, literally tears in his eyes, and he said, "What was I going to say?" We had survivors sitting in the synagogue. What was I going to say? So for a whole generation after the war, we simply suspended the question. We stopped asking those questions of why, and we simply adopted an ethic of survival. It was put best by the Canadian Jewish philosopher Emil Fackenheim, who said that after the war we have a 614th commandment: don't let Hitler win. And that became the driving ideology of North American Jewry. We built institutions. We built synagogues and day schools and federation institutions and summer camps and seminaries. We built all the institutions of the state of Israel. We built and we built and we built. But if you stop the building for a moment and say, for what? We didn't want to answer that question. Because it was too hard to answer, so we suppressed the question until about 1990. More or less, 1985, 1990. And suddenly young Jews started asking us that question. Why? You want me to marry a Jew? You want me to have Jewish children? You want me to affiliate with a synagogue? You want me to adopt Judaism? Why? Why be Jewish? But the community was mute in answering that question because for so long we didn't answer that question. So we need to answer that question now. That's what our children are asking us. Because they're only going to choose into this tradition if we answer that question with some affirmative answer. So tonight I'm going to try to answer that question, because that's the biblical book report. What's this all about? What's the message? What's the message of Judaism? So let's come back with me now to the very beginning. In the beginning, there were two. The great goddess of the sky waters, whose name was Tiamat, the great god of the earth waters, whose name was Ea. And their waters mingled, and out of their waters came all the gods, gods of thunder and lightning, of life and death, of fertility and barrenness, of light and darkness. And the gods filled the world with all kinds of noise. This is a story that was told in an ancient Mesopotamian tale that was discovered in 1837 when archaeologists excavated Tel Nineveh, the capital city of the Assyrian Empire, which today you know as the Iraqi town of Mosul. They discovered in that tell clay tablets with the cuneiform records of the ancient Near Eastern mythologies. This one's called Enuma Elish. It was the creation story told by the ancient Mesopotamians. It's 5,000 years old, which makes it more than 1,500 years older than our Bible. It was Abraham's bedtime story. And it tells the story that there was a sky goddess, Tiamat, and an earth god, Ea, and they mixed their waters together, and the gods were born. And the gods filled the world with conflict and struggle and partying. And Tiamat, Mother Tiamat, got tired of the noise, the commotion, and she wanted the pristine quiet that she once enjoyed with her consort. So she decided to destroy all the gods and return the world to its pristine peace. Somebody tipped off the gods. The gods came in council. They were terrified of their mother goddess. And they wondered who would defend them. And up stood Marduk, god of lightning and thunder. And he said, I will fight the mother god, but if I'm victorious, you must appoint me king of the gods. And all the gods agreed. And Marduk went to war with his mother. Mind you, this is 7,000 years before Sigmund Freud. A son and his mother go to war. For tablet after tablet, it describes the struggle between the mother god and her son, the thunder god. And finally, in the last tablet, he pries open her mouth with a thunderbolt and casts another thunderbolt into her belly, and she dies in agony. And the gods are safe, and they have a party to celebrate, and they crown Marduk king of the gods. And then they made a terrible discovery. Mama did all the shopping. There was nothing to eat. And they all came to their newly crowned god, Marduk, and they kvetched. That's how you say it in Mesopotamia. What are we going to eat? So Marduk decided to create a solution to this problem. He took mud from beside the great rivers, and he formed the human being for the express purpose of serving the gods. Literally, human beings would offer savory sacrifices, and the savory sacrifices would nourish the gods. And that's how the world began. That's the Enuma Elish myth. Now that myth is a very important statement. A myth is not a fairy tale. A myth is not some fiction. A myth is a truth told in the form of a story. What world does that myth describe? It describes a world where you as a human being are subject to all sorts of forces around you, which are at war with each other and with you. So that anything you dream of, anything you aspire to, anything you wish to build, anything you wish to create, the gods are only going to come in and destroy it. That myth is a myth of passivity, of surrender. Don't try too hard. Don't dream too much. Don't build too much. Don't become visible in the world, because anything you do, the gods will come and sully it. You human beings have a very small role in this world, so shah still, don't ask for too much. That is the story that our Bible came to destroy. Now we understand, because of the archaeological excavations of 1837 and the discovery of Enuma Elish, now we understand that our Torah was a polemic, Genesis was a polemic against that story. Our story, Breshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. And earth was unformed and void, with the Spirit of God over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God separated the light from the darkness. And he called the light day and the darkness night. And he blessed it, said it's good. It's a boring story. It makes bad cinema. There's no conflict. There's no struggle. There's no war. There's no sex. It's a horrible story for cinema. But it's a brilliant story for myth. Because what does that story say? The world is ordered. The world has purpose. The world is the creation of a God who dreams of creating something and invites you to become God's partner in the process of that creation. Because on the sixth day, God arrests the narrative and says, let's make the human being in our image. You and I are created in the image of the Creator so that we can join the process of creating. It is an exact opposite of the Mesopotamian story. The Mesopotamian story counsels surrender, counsels passivity. The biblical story says, you are the Creator's partner. Stand up, you are empowered, take responsibility. It elevates the human being. It raises the horizons of human possibility. That was the purpose of Genesis. That was the purpose of Genesis. And I'm going to suggest to you at the end of this talk that Mesopotamian myth never died. See, myths are never proven wrong, and they never die. They come back. They come back. And this question of Genesis or Enuma Elish, the Mesopotamian myth, this is still a very live question. Now, what did the Bible say? The Bible, especially the book of Genesis, is a drama written in 3 acts. Act 1, we introduce the God. We know nothing about this God, by the way. No backstory. We don't know where he comes from. We don't know what he's about. We don't know if he's married or single. We know nothing about him. No prequel. We just know 2 things. 1, he dreams. 2, he creates. And he wants a partner to dream and to create with him. To dream of a world of perfection and to create it with him. And he creates this human being. And he puts the human being in paradise. And says, I gotta work for you. Make my world perfect. But you know, human beings don't like to be told what to do. Right? I don't know how many of you have ever parented teenagers. But they just don't like, even if it's a benign thing, they just don't want to be told what to do. And we rebelled. We rebelled and we filled the world with all sorts of violence and chaos and evil. And at the end of the first parsha, the end of the first week's Torah portion, God says, Vavoi, I'm going to destroy it all. And just before he destroys it all, his eye catches one man with moral potential. Russell Crowe. Noah. And he says, him. I couldn't create a partner. Maybe I can choose one. And he enlists Noah. Says, save my world. Build a boat. Noah builds a boat. Saves all the animals. Saves his family. Goes in the boat. Saves the world. Comes out. And he fails. He's just worse than the predecessors. And God says, good God, I couldn't create one. And I couldn't choose one. Maybe I can teach a human being to be my partner in creating a world that is whole. And that's where we come in. We're the 3rd act in God's creation story. Here's the words. I put it on the sheet. Everybody got it? Okay, you ready? The Lord said to Abram. Now, there's a whole bunch of midrash. There's a whole bunch of rabbinic and rabbinic commentary on why Abraham was chosen by God. Was it because he smashed his father's idols? Was it because he discovered faith on his own? Was it because... I have a simple answer to the question. There's a really, really simple answer that nobody else seems to know. He chose Abraham because his name started with an A. If his name had been Zachary, he'd have been screwed. I mean, it's a random choice. That's the purpose of the narrative. Choose anybody. Strip him of his background and enlist him in the process of bringing wholeness to the world. So God says to this character, Abram, Lech lecha, get going. Go from your native land, from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. And here's I will make of you a great nation, I'll bless you. I'll make your name great and you'll be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. Now the Bible knows you've read Joseph Campbell. The Bible knows you know world mythology. And because you know world mythology, you know that every world mythology has the same story. Everyone. Mesopotamian mythology, European mythologies, Aboriginal mythologies in Australia, Polynesian mythologies, African mythologies, Native American mythologies, they all have the same story. The God chooses a guy and say, you'll be my hero, and together we'll conquer the world, and I'll make you rich and famous and powerful. And the Bible knows you know that. So it's going to play off of that. It's going to parody what you already know. It parodies accepted cultural tropes with a surprise at the end. So the God says, leave home and follow me. All the gods ask you that. And the God says, I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. All the gods say that. And I will make your name great. All the gods say that. But only one mythology in all the world has the next phrase. Because in all the other world mythologies, the next phrase is, you and I will conquer and rule the world. But this one doesn't have anything about conquest. And nothing about dominion, nothing about ruling. It says something else. Ve'ata heye bracha. Be a blessing. Stop a second. This is really important. Be a blessing. You want to know the job description of the Jewish people? Be a blessing. You want to know your job description as a human being? Be a blessing. I don't know about you, but we have bar mitzvahs in my shul pretty often. Do you have those here? You know, and we have a custom that was bequeathed to us by Satan, where we allow the parents to talk to the kid. Do you have that here also? No. Thank God. Give thanks, oh Lord. Because our parents get up and you are the greatest soccer player who ever lived. You're going to go right from 7th grade to Stanford. You're the most wonderful. And I say to parents, is that really what we should be saying to the kids?
No, Oxford.
Right? Oxford, yeah. Noch besser, right? What I want to say to a kid is, I hope you're materially successful. I hope you're materially comfortable. But that's irrelevant in this building. In this building, we have only one standard for judging a human life. Are you a blessing? Are you a blessing? If I said your name, is there somebody in the world who will say, ah, she's my blessing? That person's my blessing. To be a blessing. To be a blessing. That's the standard of success in a Jewish life. To create a generation of kids who are blessings, that's the standard of success in a synagogue. And now, everything in the Bible that's worth saying, God says twice. That's why rabbis are so redundant. Did you know that? So he says, I will bless those who bless you. That's cool. I will curse those who curse you. That's better. I have that on a bumper sticker on my car. I drive LA freeways. You gotta have some transcendent yichus. And then the next line is so wonderful. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. All of the families of the earth. Who is the recipient of Abraham's blessings? God doesn't say what you think he's going to say. You think God's going to say, obey me. God doesn't say that. Revere me. God doesn't say that. God doesn't even say, be a blessing to me. To whom are we obligated to be a blessing? No. That would be good too. Not bad. But what does it say? To all the families of the earth. To all the families of the earth. They are the recipients of our blessing. So, for the final exam question, is this a statement of Jewish particularism or a statement of Jewish universalism? Answer is yes. It is the greatest statement of Jewish particularism because this is God choosing us. And it's a statement of Jewish universalism because our job, the reason we were chosen, is to bring blessing to all the world. You can't separate the two. There's no such thing as Jewish particularism without universalism or universalism without particularism. They go together. This is our mission in the world, to be a blessing. Now, once having said this, having put this out, now the Bible's going to have some interesting, it's going to worry about, it's going to work on this a little bit. Really? Because realize what's just been said. If God really wanted to bless the world, why doesn't God just bless the world? What do you need Abraham for? But in the words of the beautiful title of Abraham Joshua Heschel's great book, God is in search of man. God needs us. God cannot bless the world without us. God needs somebody, somewhere, to be a vessel of blessing, to be an instrument of blessing in the world. That's your job as a Jew. That's what the whole tradition is about. And you're given this remarkable capacity, this remarkable responsibility to be a blessing. So now the Bible wants to know, really? God needs us? Really? How much? How much? What does it mean, God needs us? And now the Bible's going to give us a thought experiment. Here's the thought experiment. You ready? Everybody ready? Okay? 3 angels show up to Abraham's tent. By the way, what happened just before is he was told to circumcise himself. So he took a sharp rock, and he was 99 years old, and he circumcised himself. Don't try this at home. And he's sitting in front of the tent like recovering, like one can only imagine. And three angels show up in his tent, and he runs around, fixes him supper. Now, an angel in the Bible is a message embodied, like a hologram.
And the first angel says, Mazel tov, you and Sarah are going to be parents. And Sarah says, honey, I'm 90, he's 100. Viagra won't be invented for 4,000 years. Have you seen my old man? God says, you don't think I can do miracles? Watch this. And she's pregnant. Don't ask me how. That's one angel. Now we're left with two. Ready? Everybody ready? The men set out from there and looked down towards Sodom. Now, Abraham lives in Hebron. He lives on the outskirts of Hebron. Right past Hebron is the Rift Valley, where the Dead Sea is, so you can see it from there. And that's where Sodom is. Sodom is in that valley. Abraham walking with them to see them off. Verse 17. Everybody see verse 17? Now the Lord had said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? Stop. Everybody stop. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? Who is God talking to? Himself. This is divine rumination. We are hearing God's thoughts. Now, God says, should I tell Abraham what I'm about to do? What's the answer to that question? Of course not. You're God. Like, what fun is it to be God if you got to explain yourself? See, me, I'm married. Okay? So I carry, I'm traveling, so I carry this even on Shabbos. I carry one of these. You know what one of these is? This is called a husband minder. Right? Because my wife calls me in the middle of the day and she says, where are you? And I get angry and sarcastic and I say, I'm in a brothel in New Orleans with 3 women. And she says, no, really, where are you? And I say, I'm with the bar mitzvah kid at my desk. What do you mean, where am I? Are you coming home for dinner? Of course I'm coming home for dinner. What time are you coming home? 6 o'clock. What are we having? I don't know. But that's why I carry one of these. Because I am in a relationship with my wife now 40 years. And we are responsible to each other. And she has a right to ask me, where am I? And I have a relationship with my community, with my congregation. So they call me and ask me where I am. Because I'm in a relationship. I have to explain myself. I am accountable. Is God accountable? Is God accountable to anybody? Does God have to explain himself to anybody? Can someone call God and say, where are you? What are you doing? Right? I liked Yosemite, but I really didn't like everything else you did, right? I mean, does God have to explain himself? But you see, God has found God's self in a very weird position. God now has a partner. And if God has a partner, God's accountable. So it says, since Abraham is to become a great and populous nation, and the nations are to bless themselves by him, for I single him out, and we instruct his children, his posterity, to keep the way of the Lord by doing just what is just and right. If Abraham is going to represent God's justice and God's right in the world, he has to understand how God operates. And God can't go around smashing cities without letting him know. So suddenly, this radical idea, once you admit a partner into your life, you become accountable. If this wasn't written in the Bible, this would be blasphemy. Because think about what you're saying. This is remarkable. God is accountable. So what happens? Go down a little bit with me, right? The men went on from there. Verse 22. Abraham remained before the Lord. Verse 23. Abraham came forward. Vayigash Avraham. The word vayigash means to step up. Step up to the plate. Step up to the encounter. Enter the encounter. Right? And Abraham says, will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there be 50 innocent in the city? Would you then wipe the place out and not forgive it for the sake of the innocent 50? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you, shall not the judge of all the earth do justice? Wow! Look at that verse again. This verse is astonishing. Look at verse number 25. Everybody see it? Now, it starts with the words, Chalila Lecha. Anybody here a Hebrew scholar? Chalila Lecha does not mean far be it from you. That was the translator who was, I know the translator, it was H.L. Ginsberg, who was a very urbane, quiet, constipated man. Right? Chalila Lecha doesn't mean far be it from you. Chalila Lecha is much more gutsy. My mother and father would go away, and my bubby would come stay with us. My bubby was a 4'2" Lithuanian woman who never learned too much English. And as soon as the car turned the corner, my brothers and I would be at each other's throats, beating the living life out of each other. Bubby would walk into my bedroom. She'd see me about to smack my brother. She wouldn't raise her voice. She would never touch me. Instead, all she needed to do was give me the look. It's a look perfected by 200 generations of Bubbies. It's a look that just said, why? I am so disappointed in you. I am so disgusted by you. You are so much better than that. And then she would whisper 3 Yiddish words. Anybody here speak a Bissl Yiddish? Right? 3, so you help me translate, right? First she'd say, she'd say, a shande. Shame on you. Then, a cherpa. Noch a shame. Even more shameful. And then she would leave behind all linguistic eloquence and simply say, "Feh." And I'd fall to my knees. I said, Bubby, hit me with a stick. Beat me with a stick. Just don't give me feh. Because what Jewish kid could withstand? You've just disappointed the one woman in the world who loves you unconditionally, you know? Like my Bubby, it was my Bubby, like my Bubby, and she's like, I'm so disappointed in you. That's what Abraham says to God. And the phrase is really good. The line is better than the translation. To bring death upon the innocent, just like the guilty. And the Hebrew is Vahaya katzadik karasha. So that the innocent and the guilty are indistinguished. Good and evil, right and wrong. They're all mixed up in your world. Is that what you wanted, says Abraham? Is that what you wanted? A world without moral differentiation? A world where good and evil, right and wrong, innocent and guilt are just equal? That's what you want? Is that the world you wanted? Fair! Fair! That's not what you want. The judge of all the earth must do justice. Now, what happens next? That's the whole Jewish tradition, is what happens. I want you to go home, not tonight, the Shabbos, tomorrow. And I want you to look up, there's a 10-second movie I want you to watch. It's called Bambi versus Godzilla. Has anyone ever seen this movie? Let me describe it, and then when you get home, it's on YouTube. It's 30 seconds long. It's free. It's a picture of the forest where Bambi lives. You know, remember Bambi? And it's got the birdies and the bunnies and the little squirrelies, and everyone's happy. And then little Bambi comes frolicking in, and she's frolicking in, and then you see this enormous foot come from the sky. That's the whole movie. That's the whole movie. That's what God should do to Abraham. What does God need this for? What do you need a loudmouthed Jew telling you what to do? Why would you tolerate this? Why would God tolerate this? Why do you need a Jew telling you what to do? How many of us as parents have looked to our kids and said, because I'm the father, that's why. Or because I said so, that's why. And at a certain point you say, it's my job to make these decisions, shut up. But God says to Abraham, okay. Right. Jackie Mason, remember the comedian Jackie Mason? He once said the greatest Jew ever lived was Menachem Begin, and he will go down in history for his most famous words. All right. Okay, fine. Okay, all right. You want peace? Okay, we give you. You want the Sinai back? We give it to you. Fine, okay. Right? Okay. God says okay. Okay. Why does God say okay? Why? No, he has every choice. You smush him like a bug. Why does God? Think about what's just happened. God has allowed this man to compromise the prerequisites of divine majesty, to compromise divine authority in the name of the divine dream of justice. Because if you stand for justice, God doesn't mind backing off and letting you drive. Now the Bible says, let's see how we can play this one. Let's see how far he's willing to go. Let's see how far he's willing to go. Abraham has sold enough camels in the shuk at Beersheba that he knows when he gets a live one in the shop, he knows what he's doing. So he says to him, you said 50, right? Didn't you say 50? You'd save the city for 50? What if 5 are missing from the 55? You said 50, so 5 is only 10%. So, well, can I hear 45? Do I see 40? I see 45 over here. Do I see 40 in the room? Is there a 40? There's a 40 in the room. Do I see 30? Do I see 30? In the corner, there's a 30. Do I see 20? Do I see 20? Is there a 20? Would someone take it for 20? I see a 20 in the room. Do I see 10? Oh, I see 10. Going once. Going twice, sold to the God of the universe. A crazy story. Man handling with God over the fate of a city. It's here because it's a ridiculous idea that a human being is so empowered by this God, by this tradition, by this way of looking at the world, that you can challenge even God himself in the name of justice. This is chutzpah. Now, chutzpah is a good word. You know the word chutzpah? Most people think it's Yiddish, but it's actually not. In Yiddish, it means, what does it mean? Nerve, temerity, cheekiness. You know, what's the famous joke was, chutzpah is the kid who kills his parents and throws himself on the mercy of the court as an orphan. Which was done, so it became not funny anymore. Right? That's chutzpah. What's chutzpah? Mama takes the kid to the shore, to the beach, and the kid's playing, making a sandcastle at the beach. Comes along a tsunami and whips the kid out to sea. Mama turns her eyes toward heaven and says, For this I struggled and suffered and suffered and struggled. For this. And suddenly another tsunami comes and deposits the kid right in her arms. Not a hair on his head is messed. And she turns her eyes toward heaven and said, He had a hat! That's chutzpah. But you see, chutzpah, it means something more than that. It means something more than that. In the Talmud, we find the phrase chutzpah already in the Talmud. In the Talmud, it means something more positive. It means unquenchable life, unquenchable power. There's a beautiful phrase that says, Eretz Yisrael has chutzpah. The land of Israel is possessed of the quality of chutzpah, because no matter how many times it's conquered, it always flowers again in the spring. Unquenchable life force. This is what the Jewish tradition tried to teach. That human beings are both empowered and responsible to a remarkable degree. To a remarkable degree. And this is the essence of what Genesis is getting across. Now, just to show you this, I gave you another story. When we read the Talmud, we read arguments. Hillel says this, Shammai says this, Rabbi Akiva says this, Rabbi Yishmael says that, Abaye, Rava. When you read the Bible, you read it like a monologue. It sounds like one word, one line. But it really isn't. The Bible's full of dialogues also. You just have to go find them. And the opposite story to this one is a book that occurs at the end of the Hebrew Bible called the Book of Job. Now, most Jews don't even ever read this book. They think it's in the New Testament, but it's not. It's in our Bible. And the Book of Job is a really strange book. Here's what it's about, really quickly. Just go really quickly. There was a man in the merry old land of Uz whose name was Job. And he was righteous and good, and he revered God, and he kept away from evil, and he had all kinds of wealth and all kinds of good things. And then one day, God and Satan, now Satan here is not church lady Satan. Satan just means God's sort of alter ego. But God and Satan are talking, and Satan says, of course he reveres you. Look what you've given him. Take away his wealth, take away his privilege, take away his health, and he'll curse you like all other people. And God says, okay, try it, but don't kill him. In other words, God accepts the bet. And Job loses everything. He loses his health, he loses his wealth, he loses his children, he loses his position, he loses everything, and he suffers terribly. Now, you ever hear the phrase, the patience of Job? That lasts 2 chapters. For the next 35 chapters, he screams to God, why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me? And what's terrible is, it makes it even worse, is that these 4 neighbors come. And they tell him, you know what? You deserve what's happening to you. Don't do this when someone's in pain. It's a really bad idea. It makes it worse. You know, when you say to somebody who's already suffering and is miserable, you say, well, it's their own damn fault, that's why. But they say to him, look, God is just. God never does anything that's wrong. You must have done something to deserve this. And Job says, what? If I did something, tell me what it is and I'll repent. But if you don't tell me the sin, what good does it do to punish me? I don't know what I'm supposed to repent. And if it's a sin this big, it must have been one mother of a sin. And I don't know what it was. And I don't think I sinned. And over and again in the book of Job, you have these parallels back to the Abraham story. Like, for example, he has this amazing line where he says, if you look on the second page, he says, it's all one. He destroys the blameless and the guilty. Job accuses God of doing just what Abraham told him not to do in Sodom. And now we come to the end of the book. Is it okay if I give you the end of the book? I'll give you the end of the book. I know I'll ruin the surprise, but it's okay. God shows up at the end of the book. Anybody like movies here? Anybody remember that scene in Annie Hall when there's this guy spouting off about Marshall McLuhan and Woody Allen brings Marshall McLuhan? At the end of the book, God shows up. He said, you arguing with me? Talk to me directly. What's your problem, kid? And Job says, I'm suffering and I don't deserve it. But you see, God shows up at the end of the book of Job in a hurricane. When Elijah had problems with God, he comes in a still small voice. When Moses needed God, he comes in a burning bush. But when Job has a problem, he comes in 150 mile an hour winds. Hurricane. And he says to him, who are you? Look at chapter 38. Everybody see a little 38 on the second page? The Lord replied to Job out of the tempest. Who is this who darkens counsel, speaking without knowledge? Gird your loins like a man. I will ask, you inform me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? He takes him on a tour of nature. He says, where were you when I put the sea where it belongs? Where were you when I put the stars in the sky? Where were you when I taught horses to gallop and lions to roar and sea monsters to swim? Who do you think you are? If I were casting this in a movie, Joe Pesci is God. Wise guys, right? Who do you think you are? Who do you, Robert De Niro, like, you talking to me? You talking to me? Come on. Who are you? You're nobody. You're a worm. You're less than a worm. Shut up. God says to Job, shut up. You don't question me because you're only a man. And here's the end of the book. It's a tragedy. Because here's at the end. Here's the end. Look at the very bottom. Job said in reply to the Lord, I know you can do everything, that nothing you propose is impossible for you. Who is this who obscures counsel without knowledge? Indeed, I spoke without understanding of things beyond me which I didn't know. Hear now, I will speak, I will ask, you inform me. I heard you with my ears, now I see you with your eyes. Therefore I recant and relent, being but dust and ashes. Job says, I give up. Don't turn page yet. You got to stay there a second. Job says, I give up. You're right. I can't ask you this question. I can't ask. Now, by the way, just to show you the relationship between the two texts, there's only two places in the entire Hebrew Bible where a man says, I am but dust and ashes. Here in Job 42, and in Genesis 18. And if you look at the two lines side by side, when Job says it, he says, look, I'm dust and ashes, you're God, I can't ask you for an explanation. You don't owe me an explanation. When Abraham says it, he says it ironically. He says it after he gets God to 50. This is when he starts bargaining him down. He says, I'm just dust and ashes. But what if there are 5 missing? Can I get 45? Can I get 45? Can I get 40? It's ironic in Abraham's case. It's actual in Job's case. Now, here we have two different characters in the Bible, Abraham and Job. Not just characters. We have two different worlds. Abraham's world and Job's world. The religious universe of Abraham, the religious universe of Job. In the religious universe of Job, things happen and you can't ask why, or you can never get an answer. It's futile to ask why. In the religious world of Abraham, you're always asking why. Two different choices. You have a choice. How do you want to walk the world? And incidentally, just so we get this right, who is Job? By the way, anyone ever met a Jewish kid named Job? No, I'm serious. The rabbis and I will tell you, we've named kids all kinds of weird things, right? I shouldn't say this, I'll insult somebody, but I do baby namings all the time, And your name will be called Chayefega Surah, and in English, Mackenzie Taylor Hunter, Gold Farm. You get names like this, right? Right. Your name will be China, Afghanistan, In my show, for some reason, one year, everybody named their kids for avenues in New York. I named Lexington, Madison, Chelsea. I said to a family, you got a Lexington and Madison. The next kid either has to be Park or Fifth, depending on which one. It's just really weird, they named their kids for subway lines in Manhattan, I name you IRT. Never named a kid Job. Ever. Why not? Because it's not a Hebrew name. Because the story of Job's not a Hebrew story. It's actually much older than Hebrew. The name Job, the story, comes from an ancient, same people that wrote the story that Abraham, I told you before, the Enuma Elish. Ancient Mesopotamians, ancient Akkadians, earliest writing, Akkadian language. And what does Job, the name, mean in Akkadian? Everyman. John Doe. Occupant. I get a lot of his mail. Occupant. He is the cipher for the common human experience. And what the book says is the common human experience is we meet God in nature. It doesn't make any sense to rail against nature. Nature's not just. It rains on good people, it rains on evil people. Right? Earthquakes destroy nice people's houses, earthquakes destroy evil people's houses. Nature doesn't have any morality. That's what Job learns. That's where Job comes from. But Abraham isn't every man. He's covenanted. And because he's covenanted, he has a different relationship with God. He's expected to look at the world through different eyes. And the eyes of Abraham are the eyes of a person who says, no matter how brutal the world might be, I will never give up the dream of justice. I will never give up a dream of wholeness. I will never give up a dream of tikkun, of fixing, of repairing this world. If you want to live a serene life, pick up Job. Job, the advantage of Job's way of looking at the world is you get serenity. Because you give up, you surrender. You don't have dignity, but you have serenity. If you take up Abraham's way of life, you'll never have serenity. Serenity is not a Jewish value, by the way. I don't know if you knew this. I don't know if you've ever eaten in my Seder table. But what is a Jewish value? Dignity. The dignity of saying, I am God's partner, empowered to fix the world, to repair the world. I've been empowered to do this, and that is my responsibility. So no matter who I have to challenge, I will demand justice of the world. I will keep demanding justice of the world, because that's why I was put into this world, Hayeh Bracha, to be a blessing. That's the truth, the message of the Jewish tradition. So, would I recommend this book to my friends? You bet. Thanks so much. How late is it here? It's the same time zone as me, right?
Yeah, 9:05.
All right, if anybody wants to ask a question, give a counter sermon, or ask us about ball teams that we root for, this is your last chance. I'd be happy to try and answer any question you have.
Mark.
Yes, sir.
I have a question about Leah.
About
Leah?
Leah.
What was Leah's perspective in the whole story? And why is she mentioned after Rachel when we do the Imahot?
Yeah, good question. Leah, it depends on how deeply you want to read. So Leah, of course, is Father Jacob marries actually 4 women. Don't try this at home. 2 of them are sisters. Then each of them comes with a handmaid, Bilhah and Zilpah. So, he wanted to marry Rachel. The father-in-law switched them, and he ends up with Leah. And then you watch a very interesting thing as the story starts, because what happens is, it starts out with Jacob madly in love with Rachel and stuck with Leah. And over the course of the narrative, he becomes disillusioned with Rachel, and he falls in love with Leah. Because unlike Rachel, Rachel has this emotional tempestuousness, this emotional power. And as a young man, he's crazy in love with that. But as he gets older, he loves Leah's stability, her wisdom, her power. It's a really interesting, and what I would say to you, Mark, what I would say is, and don't get me wrong, this is a parable about men falling in love with women. The woman I fell in love with was emotionally tempestuous and passionate, and the woman that she became was deep and wise and mature. And as our love persisted, it changed. We all start out with Rachel, and we all end up with Leah, if we're lucky. If we're lucky. And that's, I think, what the story is supposed to tell you. That's my reading of the story. Okay? Right? Now, Bilhah and Zilpah, that I can't account for. Do not take the maid, please. That was a wonderful question, though. Thank you so very much. All right, someone else have a question? Yes, sir, please.
You keep referring to God as a male.
Yeah, I know. It's a bad habit, and I shouldn't do that. You know, but that's how we talk to her, so she's male. It's a very, very bad habit. I was raised in a traditional Jewish home, in a traditional Jewish synagogue, by traditional patriarchal Jews, and I'm trying to break myself of that habit, but I haven't figured it out yet. That plus chocolate are really bad habits that I have. My wife is a rabbi. My wife was the first woman accepted to the Jewish Theological Seminary rabbinical program, and she's the second one ordained. She's the first mother ordained a rabbi. When she was ordained, she got her certificate, and my son was sitting on my lap. He was 2. And he screamed out, "Ima!" And that's when the seminary realized what they had just done. So I have a very strong feminist background, but I still do this, and I apologize. It's a bad habit, very bad habit.
Sure.
Yes, please.
How do we bring back the blessing into the bar and bat mitzvah group?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. You know, bar and bat mitzvah is such an interesting thing because there's no more fragile, vulnerable, weird age than 13. You take poor kids at 13 and we make them stand in front of folks and they're all gooky and geeky and goofy and weird. The first says 2 things I would suggest, and your rabbis know this better than me. Number 1, the bar mitzvah is not about a ceremony. The bar mitzvah is about a moment of life. The more we make the whole thing about a moment of life and less about a ceremony on the bima, the more meaningful it becomes. This is the last time you can see the little kid your kid was, and the first time you can see the grown-up she or he is going to become. This is such a powerful moment for parents. It's such a powerful moment for the community to speak to that kid about what's the meaning of being an adult. What's the meaning of growing up? What's the meaning of life? What's the purpose of being alive? That's what this experience is supposed to be about. So the less it's about the ceremony moment, and the more we focus on the change that's coming to this child's life, and the change that's coming to this family, the better, right? Second, the less it's about the kid, and the more it's about the whole family, the better. Because it's not just the kid. The kid's in the morning, the kid's going to go back to 7th grade, you know? But that family's going to change because you have to parent an adolescent differently. Parenting an adolescent is a whole different ballgame than parenting a little kid. I say this to bar mitzvah families altogether. It scares the holy hell out of their parents. So when you were a little kid, anything you broke, we could fix. If you broke a window, we got it fixed. If you broke a bone, we got it fixed. If you got a bad grade, we went and talked to the teacher. You have now reached the age when you can make mistakes we can't fix. And I say to parents and to kids, in the next 5 or 6 years of your life till you move out, the most exhilarating, interesting, and terrifying years of your whole life. Because you're going to go from being a little 13-year-old to being an 18-year-old, 19-year-old. You're going to grow in every way possible. But there are going to be people around you who make good choices and people around you who make bad choices. And the bad choices can be fatal. And that's what's really scary about parenting an adolescent. So I say to the kid, you got to know that there are people who can help you. Your parents are actually pretty wise people. Grandparents are wise people. Rabbis are wise people. Let's talk about how we can support this kid through this time of life so this kid makes wise choices and not foolish choices. And how this whole family can restructure itself to support this child's independence. Because you know what parenting an adolescent is? It's an exercise in ambivalence. The kid wants to be independent, but not too independent. They want to push back against limits, but they want the limits. They want to express their new body in all of its interesting features, but they're terrified of what it can mean. It's push me, pull you. It's completely ambivalent. I don't know how many of you have parented an adolescent. There's a good book, by the way, and I get the title wrong, but it's more or less, I hate you, you're the world's worst parents, now drive me and Jennifer to the mall. And that's the story. I mean, that's what it's like, because these poor kids are trying to figure out the world, right? Now, it's a little bit better here in Vancouver, because you're Canadian and you live in Vancouver, than it is in LA, where we're pagans. But still, you know, we have to know that bar mitzvah is a signal to the family that their values have to be expressed in a very different way now, because the kid is growing into a new stage of life, and bar mitzvah can be very meaningful as a symbol of that. And that's how I think bar mitzvah ought to be handled. Still, they're going to have these services and parties. Do you have parties here for bar mitzvah kids? Oh, God.
Not like us.
Not like LA? We have these bacchanalian feasts that look like Cirque du Soleil, motorcycle riders and parachutists and contortionists, and it's just weird. But, yes, please, sir.
How do you, with children that age, how do you balance freedom and responsibility?
Yes, how do you balance freedom and responsibility? How long you got? Well, I mean, let's just back up for just a second. It's not kids of that age. That's what being human is about. That's what being a grown-up is about, right? It's what's really happening is just that at that age we're introduced to it. Because when they were small, I could look at them and say, because I'm your father, that's why. And they had to listen to me. And then the day my kid was bigger than me, I realized I could never say that again. But being both free and responsible is what being an adult is all about. So how do I talk to my kid about taking responsibility, making good choices, and at the same time having the freedom to make those choices without getting in his way? That's what we prepare kids for as they get ready to become adolescents, and that's what we have to talk to them about as they become adolescents. But that's exactly the great task. That's the great task of all of being. That's what being a grown-up is about. How do you measure your own individuality against the responsibilities that you carry in the world, right? And I think this is, it's simply, and I don't think it's a bad idea, by the way, to confess to the kid your own struggles with you, my own struggles with these issues, right? And all of us know what happens when people go one side or the other. You know, if they give up all of their freedom and become totally responsible, they lose their souls. But if they give up all their responsibility and go off and do strange things, they lose the respect of the community, but they also lose their souls. Being a human being means to live in dialectics. Being a human being, live in polarities and paradoxes, and freedom and responsibility, independence and community. Right? These are all paradoxes that are part of being human. Do you want to add something? Go ahead.
Well, you almost answered it when you talked about community. How do you deal with that? With the rest of the community and supporting?
Well, the question is, does the kid really have a community? We use that word, but we use it in such different kinds of ways, right? A community means people I can really depend upon. People I can depend upon, people who really have something to say to me. So one of the things that I do with kids, I give a talk to the high school kids in my community, my synagogue. And I'll talk to them about what success means. And I'll say to them, you're all going to have a resume, you know? Resume lists all your employment experience, your educational experiences, your awards and accolades. And I think that's great. Now turn this page over and tell me who you really are on the other side of your resume. And one of the things that a resume has to have on the flip side is, are there people in the world you really care for and really care for you? Okay? And I'll ask them, is there somebody in the world you can call at 3 o'clock in the morning? And that person will say, I'm coming right now. Or is there somebody that would call you at 3 o'clock in the morning without a moment's hesitation? If you have that person in your life, you're a wealthy person. Having friends, having connections, having people we can trust. These are very, very important things. And this is what we need to be teaching kids as they get up to adolescence and as they enter adolescence. Because if we don't teach them these things, then the consumer culture outside will teach them a whole different set of values. I gave a sermon once called the Sermon on the Mount. Right? You've heard of the Sermon on the Mount? That's passé. I gave a sermon on the mall. What is the mall? Ask any teenager. If you have some free time, where do you want to go spend it? I want to go hang out in the mall. What is the message of the mall? The message of the mall says, your self-worth is tied up in the consumer goods that you carry and the clothes you wear and the way you look and this kind of stuff. And what do we say? Your self-worth should be carried in your capacity to be a blessing to the world. It's a completely different set of values. And this language is what our adolescent education needs to be emphasizing. That's another lecture. I can come back another time and give you all weekend on that one. But as long as you ask, thanks so very much. Have a good night, everybody.
I said before was the appetizer. This was the appetizer for the rest of the whole weekend. A main course, really. Rabbi, thank you so, so much. I want to give Jerry Groh just a moment to share a couple of things, and then we'll let you go home.
I like that last one, the rabbi said, and then we'll let you go. Well, first I'd like to thank Rabbi Feinstein for making the effort, taking the time to come up here, and to our rabbis, Rabbi Dan and Carrie Brown, for participating and supporting this whole project. I also like to say that Rabbi Bregman, who isn't here tonight, but he said he'd be here tomorrow morning, was instrumental in supporting us when we started the Torah study 25 years ago. And so he had an investment in this as well. I felt a little badly because the Goldbergs left here. Now, Saul is about 95, and I think he just couldn't manage any longer, and his daughter Leah. And I wanted you to know that they were the people who actually financially have supported this evening and this weekend. And I'm sorry that they're not here to see it, but hopefully I can do this again tomorrow and they'll be here. And interestingly, one last thing, Saul is not a member of our congregation. He, like you, belonged to BI. Yeah, and Leah, I think, does too. But Saul has been coming to our Torah study for about 15 years. And the way he came to Torah study was that he brought a disabled member of our congregation, Michael Leposki, here. For many years, he had been a patient of Michael's. And when Michael no longer could manage to come on his own, Saul drove him. Michael died about 7 or 8 years ago. Saul liked Torah study. We didn't even know that he liked Torah study because he never said anything. He sort of sat there like Michael's associate, and he brought him, and then afterwards, when he started coming on his own, he started to participate. He also brought his wife with him. Julie's no longer able to come, but she's still living. They're living in the Weinberg. So I wanted you to know just a little bit of the backstory, and he decided this year, he came to me and he said, I want to do something for this congregation. I learn more here and I enjoy it more here than I do anywhere else, but I got to stay where I belong, where I enjoy. I guess he's got his burial plot there. We all So anyway, that's the backstory of him. So I wanted to make sure you all knew that. So I hope to see some of you here, or all of you here tomorrow. We'll make room in the Torah study in Sarah's tent if you come. So don't worry about it. Good night.